The cloth trembled in her hands, so thin and stained it seemed barely enough to cover her. "Please, don't take it off," she whispered, her voice ragged, eyes darting like a cornered animal's. Dust swirled in the barn's dim lantern light, settling on splintered boards and the scent of hay. The rancher's hand hovered near the edge of the cloth, his knuckles white from the tension in his grip. He'd thought he'd seen it all in this life. Horses dying, fires swallowing barns, men shooting over debts. But nothing had prepared him for this. The barn was silent except for the faint creak of the loft above and the soft hiss of the wind through cracks in the boards. Outside, a storm muttered, distant thunder promising rain. But here inside, the world had shrunk to the two of them. The girl's breath came in short, quick bursts. He could see the dirt crusted under her nails, the bruises curling across her arms, the way her body wavered on the edge of collapse. There was fear, yes, but there was something else. Something he couldn't yet name. He swallowed, tasting iron on his tongue. Years on the range had taught him caution, but instinct whispered danger in a way no gunfire ever had. The cloth was heavy, not just with whatever it hid, but with the weight of unspoken stories, secrets that would claw at him if he looked too closely. He had choices, all perilous. Trust her, flee, or, God help him, look. Outside the barn, a horse stamped impatiently, breaking the fragile quiet. A crow cawed from the fence post, unnaturally loud. And somewhere in the shadows, the outline of a figure lingered at the edge of the lantern's glow. The rancher's boots scuffed against the straw, hesitant. Every nerve in his body screamed that this wasn't just a girl in need. This was a storm waiting to break, and he was standing in its eye. Finally, he nodded once, almost imperceptibly, to himself. He moved closer. The lantern swayed, casting a long shadow across her face, revealing the flicker of desperation in her eyes. He reached out, and the faint sound of fabric tearing made them both freeze. Then, just as his fingers brushed the edge, a low, harsh growl from the shadows froze him mid-motion. Something, or someone, was in the barn with them. The growl lingered, low and guttural, like gravel rolling down a slope. The rancher froze, the lantern trembling in his hand. He scanned the shadows, but all he saw were the flickering beams of light dancing over hay and broken barrels. Whatever it was, it didn't move closer. Yet. The girl pressed herself tighter against the wall, her fingers clutching the cloth as if it were a lifeline. He had a choice. Walk away now, leave her to whatever hunted her, and maybe live another quiet week on the ranch. Or face it and risk everything. Survival in the West was seldom clean. Morality was often an afterthought. But her eyes, they burned into him, desperate and raw, and he knew leaving would weigh on him heavier than any bullet wound. "All right," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I'm not leaving." The girl exhaled sharply, relief mingling with fear. You don't know what's under there," she said, shaking. "They'll kill you too." "Then you tell me," he said, crouching slightly, keeping his gaze on the corners. Every creak of the barn now sounded like boots on the threshold. Every gust of wind seemed to carry whispers. She hesitated, and the tension stretched like a rope about to snap. Then she finally spoke, voice trembling, almost inaudible. "It's not just me. It's a mark. They won't forgive it." He frowned. His mind raced, connecting dots between old grudges, forgotten debts, and the strange rumors that floated through town. Stories about people who vanished after crossing the wrong hands. Helping her could mean the sheriff's men, the local gang, or vengeful families might come for him. But not helping her, that was a weight he couldn't bear. A sudden knock echoed against the barn door, sharp, deliberate. His hand twitched toward the gun strapped at his hip. The girl flinched, pressing the cloth tighter to her chest. Silence followed, long enough to make him certain it wasn't just a branch. "Who's there?" he called, voice steady but low. No answer, just the faint shuffle of movement outside. The moral choice had solidified in the air between them like smoke. Protect her at all costs and risk everything he had, or leave and claim safety at the expense of her life. Every instinct in him screamed that he couldn't walk away. But the stakes had just risen. The unknown presence outside promised confrontation, and survival might depend on the very secret the girl begged him not to uncover. Another creak, closer this time. Someone, or something, was coming for them. The knock at the barn door came again, faster this time, urgent, like a drumbeat announcing trouble. The rancher's heart hammered in his chest, each thump echoing through the hollow barn. He grabbed his rifle, the cold wood steadying his trembling hands. The girl crouched behind a stack of hay bales, her eyes wide, reflecting the lantern's trembling light. "They know you're here," she whispered, voice barely audible. "They always know." He swallowed. Years of living on this land had taught him how rumors spread faster than fire. A single misstep could turn neighbors into hunters, lawmen into executioners. He had seen it too many times. But tonight, it wasn't rumors. This was real, breathing, moving. A shadow. It detached itself from the corner of the barn. Not a person at first glance, but the glint of metal caught his eye, the butt of a rifle, aiming, waiting. He froze, calculating. Fight, flee, or bluff. None felt safe. "Step away from the door," a rough voice called from outside. The tone was calm but edged with steel. "We know someone's in there." The girl whimpered, pressing her face into her knees. He crouched beside her. "Stay quiet. No sudden moves," he said. Outside, hoofbeats drummed on the dirt floor, quick and uneven. The wind carried faint voices, murmurs he could barely discern, warning him, testing him. He realized the barn's silence was gone. It had been replaced by the press of danger, surrounding them like smoke, thick and suffocating. A lantern swung in the doorway, casting long, menacing shadows across the walls. One figure stepped into the light, a man tall, broad-shouldered, eyes like chips of flint. Behind him, others followed, rifles raised, expressions unreadable but unmistakably dangerous. The rancher's jaw tightened. Every choice led to peril. If he shot first, the girl could be hit. If he surrendered, they might discover her secret, and whatever wrath that would unleash would be absolute. A tense silence stretched, broken only by the creaking barn door and the wind sighing through the slats. The girl's hand slipped into his, clutching it tightly. Her nails dug into his skin, a silent plea. "Please," she whispered again, almost lost in the sound of approaching boots. He knew, in that heartbeat, that whatever came next could not be reversed. The standoff had formed in an instant. The unknown outside, the girl in his care, and the weight of her secret hanging between them like a live wire. Then the tallest man spoke again, voice low, deliberate. "We're not leaving without it. Step aside, or there'll be blood." The rancher's eyes met hers, fear and riso. Love mirrored in both. One wrong move, and the barn would become a tomb. The air in the barn thickened, charged with tension so dense it almost pressed against their skin. The rancher lowered his rifle slightly, just enough to signal calm without showing weakness. The girl, still clutching the cloth, dared a small glance at him. Her eyes, wide and glimmering, carried gratitude, terror, and something fragile, trust. He moved closer to her, deliberately slow, letting every motion communicate patience. "We'll get through this," he murmured, though the truth of it felt brittle on his tongue. "But you need to tell me what they want. Why they're here." She hesitated, biting her lip, then slowly began to lift the cloth. Underneath, a faint scar marked her skin, delicate but unmistakable, a brand of an old bitter feud. The rancher's stomach tightened. He had heard tales of such marks, symbols of betrayal, revenge, and debts older than most men alive. The barn seemed to shrink around them as he studied it, realizing the danger she carried was more than physical. It was history, reputation, bloodlines. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, voice low. I thought it would kill me faster if they knew I was hiding it," she said, eyes downcast. It's mine, but it's not just mine." The rancher nodded, understanding in the silence. Sometimes, a small gesture spoke louder than any words. He pulled a canteen from his belt and offered it, letting her drink first. Water sloshed over the rim as she took it, small hands trembling, and the trust between them deepened in that quiet exchange. Minutes passed like hours. Each movement, each glance became a conversation of its own. He tore a piece of bread, offering it to her with a nod. She accepted, hesitant at first, then greedily, as though this simple act of sharing sustenance carried the weight of salvation. Outside, the men were still circling, voices muffled, impatient, but inside, the barn had transformed into a fragile sanctuary. Every heartbeat, every soft sound, seemed magnified in the quiet. The rancher could feel the girl's tension easing just enough to allow the bond of humanity to form, small, deliberate, and defiant against the storm waiting beyond the walls. Then came the sudden sound of a lantern hitting the ground outside, shattering the momentary calm. Horses whinnied, hooves thudded against packed dirt, and a harsh shout cut through the night. The barn's fragile safety hung by a thread, and both of them knew. Hope and danger were balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move could tip the scale into chaos, but for the first time, the rancher felt a thread of connection strong enough to stand against the storm. The barn door burst open with a force that shook the rafters. Lanterns swung, casting frantic, jagged shadows across the walls. The rancher raised his rifle, heart hammering, as men spilled into the space, rifles trained and eyes cold with expectation. The girl pressed herself against his side, trembling, yet her grip on his arm spoke of desperate courage. "Step aside," the tallest man barked, voice raw with authority. "Hand it over and no one gets hurt." The rancher's gaze darted between the intruders and the girl. The cloth hid more than just a scar. It was a mark of vengeance that could ignite old grudges into a blaze of blood. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He would not let her die for history's sins. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the rifle. "You won't find what you're looking for," he said, voice steady. "She's not your enemy." A murmur ran through the men. Whispers, suspicion, the tension of decades-old disputes suspended in the air. The girl stepped forward, hands trembling, voice barely above a whisper. "I am not what you think. The mark doesn't belong to me. It's a story you never heard. A debt that doesn't belong in this barn." Silence pressed against them. Even the wind outside seemed to pause, waiting. The tallest man studied her, eyes narrowing, then slowly lowered his weapon. One by one, the others did the same, confusion and begrudging respect flickering across their faces. Hours passed, though it could have been minutes. Words were few, gestures careful. The rancher helped her steady herself, guided her to the loft, and offered blankets. Outside, the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, casting long shadows that mingled with the remnants of fear and the promise of safety. By mid-morning, the intruders had left, not with vengeance, but with hesitation. Their questions unanswered, their anger cooled by the unexpected humanity of the rancher's choices. The girl sat quietly in the loft, the cloth still in her lap, her eyes meeting his. No words were necessary. The bond they had forged in the crucible of fear and moral choice was undeniable. Years later, she would remember the smell of hay and rain, the quiet warmth of a man who chose to protect instead of punish, who understood that survival wasn't measured in bullets, but in the courage to do what was right. The rancher watched her rid, away. The early sun catching her silhouette, illuminating the scar he had once feared. He touched the rifle at his side, then let it rest. There was danger everywhere in the west, and death lingered on the horizon like dust on the wind. But for that one morning, hope had held its ground. And as the wind swept through the barn, lifting strands of straw, he let his gaze settle on the empty doorway. The final shot lingered in his mind, a silhouette framed by sunlight, a cloth clutched close, and the quiet knowledge that sometimes mercy carried more weight than vengeance. The screen of the west went black,